The coffee tasted like recycled regret, which wasn't far from the truth considering the station's filtration system. Eli Vance sat in the observation dome of Kepler 442b's mining outpost, watching twin suns paint the rust-colored landscape in shades of amber and copper. 3 years he'd been here, cataloging microorganisms and indigenous fauna for a research grant that barely covered his synthetic protein rations. The view never got old, even if everything else did. His workstation chimed with the enthusiasm of a machine that didn't know better. Morning reports, equipment inventory, a message from his ex-wife that he'd archived without reading for the 7th consecutive month. The usual symphony of frontier life. "Another glorious day in paradise," he muttered, pulling up his field research schedule. Today's excitement involved collecting tissue samples from the crystalline moss beds in Canyon 7. The moss itself wasn't particularly interesting, but the ecosystem it supported was a xenobiologist's fever dream. Bioluminescent insects that communicated through color patterns, small reptilian creatures that could photosynthesize, and of course, the ridgebacks. Eli had been studying the ridgebacks for 2 years now. Six-legged predators with translucent spines that caught the light like fiber optics. They were the apex predators of this hemisphere. Smart, too. Pack hunters with coordination that suggested either sophisticated communication or mild telepathy. His funding committee back on Earth had been skeptical about that last part. They were skeptical about most things that didn't fit neatly into their academic boxes. He suited up in the equipment bay, checking his collection kit twice. The escort drone, affectionately named Wilson after a volleyball from some ancient Earth film, bobbed beside him with patient mechanical loyalty. "Just a routine sample run," Eli told the drone, mostly to hear something other than the hum of life support. "In and out, 2 hours maximum. What could possibly go wrong?" Wilson, being a machine of limited conversational ability, blinked an acknowledgement with its status light. The exterior airlock hissed open, and Kepler 442b's atmosphere rushed in to meet him. Breathable, technically, though it had a metallic tang that made every breath taste like you'd been licking batteries. The colony's atmospheric processor worked overtime to make the habitat modules comfortable, but out here, you got the planet raw and unfiltered. The canyon stretched before him like a wound in the planet's surface, all sharp angles and oxidized stone. His heads-up display mapped the route, a neat little path marked in helpful green arrows that made it look so simple. Wilson floated ahead, scanning for movement with its sensor array. They made good time. The moss beds were exactly where his previous surveys had marked them, growing in thick carpets along the canyon floor where underground water sources kept the soil damp. Eli knelt down, collecting samples with the methodical care of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Each specimen went into its own containment tube, labeled and logged automatically by his suit system. "You know what the worst part about this job is, Wilson?" Eli asked as he worked. "It's not the isolation. It's not the terrible coffee. It's that every time I discover something actually interesting, I have to write a paper about it. Do you have any idea how hard it is to make crystalline moss sound exciting to a peer review board?" The drone rotated slightly, which Eli had learned to interpret as robotic indifference. He was sealing his 4th sample container when Wilson's status light shifted from green to amber. Movement detected. Eli glanced at the readout on his wrist display. Probably just the small reptiles that fed on the moss. Nothing to worry about, except Wilson's light went red. Multiple large signatures, approaching fast from 3 directions. Eli's heart performed an impressive gymnastics routine in his chest. He pulled up the thermal overlay on his display and felt his stomach drop. 5 heat signatures, each one ridgeback-sized, moving with the coordinated precision he documented in his research. They were being herded into this position. Hunted. "Wilson, return to base, emergency protocol," Eli said, his voice remarkably steady considering his brain was screaming suggestions that mostly involved profanity and panic. "Transmit our location." The drone hesitated, its programming conflicting between escort duty and emergency procedures. Then it rocketed upward, disappearing over the canyon rim. Eli stood slowly, trying to remember everything he'd learned about Ridgeback behavior. They were ambush predators primarily, but they'd chase if prey ran. They relied on pack coordination, each member taking specific roles in the hunt. And they were fast, much faster than a human in a collection suit designed for sample gathering, not sprinting. The first one appeared on a rock outcropping to his left, backlit by the setting sun so that its crystalline spines blazed like a crown of fire. Beautiful, in a way that made Eli think inappropriate thoughts about his own mortality. It was watching him with eyes that held far too much intelligence for comfort. Then the others materialized from the canyon's shadows. 5 total, just as the sensors had indicated. They moved with liquid grace, spreading out to cut off every escape route with tactical precision that would have impressed a military strategist. Eli's hand moved instinctively to his hip, where a rational person would have holstered a weapon. Instead, he found his collection case. Fantastic. He was about to be eaten by alien wolves, and his only defense was a box full of moss samples and specimen tubes. His mother had been right. He should have gone to law school. The lead Ridgeback lowered its head, spines rattling with a sound like wind chimes made of glass. The others responded, creating a symphony of crystalline threat that echoed off the canyon walls. Eli did the only thing he could think of. He opened his collection case, grabbed a handful of the planet's rust-red dust, and threw it as hard as he could at the nearest predator while screaming something that was probably supposed to be intimidating, but came out more like a startled yelp. High above, in orbit, sensors aboard an Imperial scout vessel registered the thermal signatures, cataloging another instance of indigenous predator activity. A junior sensor technician almost dismissed the reading entirely, until she noticed the lone human signature in the middle of the pack, not running, but standing its ground. She flagged it for review, having no idea that she'd just changed the course of 2 civilizations. The dust cloud worked better than Eli had any right to expect. The nearest Ridgeback recoiled, shaking its head violently as the caustic particles infiltrated its sensory organs. Eli's research had documented how sensitive their crystalline spines were to airborne particulates, interfering with whatever electromagnetic sense they used to coordinate. Theory meeting practice in the worst possible laboratory conditions. The other 4 hesitated, which gave Eli approximately 3 seconds to evaluate his options. Running was out. Fighting was laughable. That left option 3, which his survival instructor back at the academy had called aggressive stupidity with commitment. He grabbed a rock the size of his fist and hurled it at the pack leader, not aiming for the head, but for the cluster of spines along its shoulder ridge. The impact sent a cascading ripple of light through its entire spine network, and the creature's coordinated movements stuttered like a corrupted data stream. "That's right," Eli shouted, his voice cracking somewhere between terror and manic determination. "I read the manual on you bastards." The Ridgeback to his right lunged, and Eli swung his collection case like a club. The aluminum container connected with a satisfying crack, specimen tubes shattering inside with small pops of broken glass. 200 credits worth of samples destroyed. His grant supervisor would kill him, assuming he lived long enough to file the expense report. The creature yelped and skittered backward, more surprised than injured. They weren't used to prey fighting back. Nothing on this planet was stupid enough to stand and fight a Ridgeback pack. Eli was breaking their algorithmic expectations, introducing chaos into their tactical calculations. He pressed the advantage born of pure desperation, moving erratically, throwing rocks, kicking dust, making himself as unpredictable as possible. His suit's medical sensors were screaming warnings about elevated heart rate and adrenaline toxicity, but that seemed like a tomorrow problem. One ridgeback tried to circle behind him. Eli spun and threw a handful of the crystalline moss directly at its face. The bioluminescent organisms activated on contact, flashing in rapid strobing patterns that the creature's visual cortex clearly wasn't equipped to process. It stumbled, disoriented, crashing into one of its pack mates. Eli laughed, a sound completely disconnected from sanity. "How's that for peer review, you six-legged bastards?" Aboard the Imperial scout vessel Eternal Whisper, Commander Surith leaned forward in her observation chair, her long ears twitching with focused attention. The human's vital signs were displayed on her tactical screen, painting a picture of biological stress that should have resulted in shutdown or flight response. Instead, the creature was attacking. "Magnify Sector 7, she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd served the Empress for 70 standard years. The viewscreen shimmered, bringing the canyon floor into sharp relief. She could see the human clearly now, a fragile biped in primitive protective gear, surrounded by predators that outweighed it considerably. "It's using environmental adaptation," her tactical officer observed, his own ears flattened against his skull in concentration. "Exploiting the indigenous species' sensory vulnerabilities. Without weapons," Surith added quietly. "Without augmentation, just biological imperative and problem-solving cognition." Her communication officer turned from her station, golden eyes wide. "Commander, should we intervene? The human appears to be in distress." Surith considered this. The Astren Dominion maintained strict protocols about interference with developing species. Humanity had only recently achieved basic interstellar travel, still decades away from the technological threshold that would warrant open contact. And yet, record everything, Surith decided, full spectrum analysis, and alert the Eternal Throne. Her Majesty will want to see this. In the canyon, Eli's luck was running out in direct proportion to his adrenaline supply. His shoulders burned, his lungs felt like someone had replaced them with furnaces, and he'd just thrown his last useful rock. The Ridgebacks had regrouped, learning from their mistakes with the kind of rapid adaptation that made them such successful predators. The pack leader watched him now with something that looked disturbingly like respect, or perhaps it was just calculating the most efficient way to separate his limbs from his torso. Hard to read emotional nuance in alien predators when you were this close to passing out. They rushed him simultaneously from 3 angles, a coordinated assault that bypassed his makeshift defenses. Eli managed to dodge the first, swing the empty collection case at the second, but the third caught him across the ribs with claws that shredded his suit's outer layer like tissue paper. He went down hard, tasting copper and dust. The Ridgeback loomed over him, spines glowing in the fading light, and Eli thought about how disappointed his doctorate advisor would be that he'd never finished his thesis. Also that the coffee really had been terrible and he wished he'd had better coffee. Then the creature did something unexpected. It stepped back. All 5 of them retreated several paces, forming a loose semicircle, watching him with those intelligent eyes. Waiting, testing. Eli coughed, pushed himself up on shaking arms, and stood. Blood ran down his side where the claws had scored, but his suit's medical system was already pumping trauma stabilizers into his bloodstream. He swayed, vision blurring at the edges, but he stayed upright through sheer spite. "Come on then," he rasped. "I've got all evening." He didn't actually. He had maybe 15 minutes before blood loss or shock shut him down. But they didn't need to know that. The Ridgebacks exchanged glances, communicating through spine flashes and body language. Then, as one, they turned and melted back into the canyon shadows, disappearing as if they'd never been there at all. Eli stood alone in the gathering darkness, shaking, bleeding, and profoundly confused. In 3 years of studying these creatures, he'd never documented retreat behavior. They either killed their prey or were driven off by larger predators. They didn't just leave. His suit's emergency beacon finally connected, Wilson's signal triangulating his position. Medical evac was inbound, ETA 12 minutes. Eli sat down carefully on a boulder, pressing his hand against his torn side, and started laughing. Quiet at first, then building to slightly hysterical giggles that echoed off the canyon walls. He'd survived. Against every reasonable expectation and probability, he'd survived. High above, Empress Kalira of the Estren Dominion reviewed the footage for the third time, her ancient eyes studying the humans' desperate dance with death. Her war council stood in attentive silence, waiting for her judgment. "How long since we've seen courage like this?" she asked softly, not really expecting an answer. True courage, born not of superiority but of necessity. None of her advisors spoke. They all knew the answer: centuries. It had been centuries since any Estren had faced such odds without overwhelming technological advantage. "Bring him to us," Kalira commanded, her decision made. Carefully, respectfully. "I wish to meet this human who fights with nothing but wit and will." Eli woke up to the smell of something that wasn't recycled air, which immediately told him he wasn't in the colony's medical bay. His ribs informed him with enthusiastic clarity that he'd done something phenomenally stupid recently. The medical stabilizers had worn off, leaving him with the kind of full-body ache that suggested he'd gone several rounds with a cargo loader and lost spectacularly. He opened his eyes to a ceiling that seemed to breathe, its surface rippling with soft bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in rhythm with something he couldn't identify. Not his heartbeat. Maybe the ship's, if ships could have heartbeats. The thought should have been more alarming than it was. "You are awake," a voice said in perfect English, though there was something about the cadence that felt translated, like listening to someone speak through processing software. "Please remain calm. You are safe." Eli turned his head, which was a mistake his neck muscles protested immediately. Standing beside what he assumed was a medical bed was a figure that made his academic brain short-circuit while his lizard brain screamed conflicting instructions about fight, flight, or possibly fainting. She was humanoid in the way that made the similarity more unsettling than the differences. Tall, easily 6.5 feet, with features that were almost familiar until you noticed the proportions were subtly wrong. Her skin held an undertone of gold that no human ethnicity could claim, and her ears swept back from her skull in elegant arcs that would have made a fantasy artist weep with joy, their tips nearly reaching her shoulders. "I'm either dead, concussed, or this is first contact," Eli said, his voice rough. "Given my recent track record, I'm betting on concussed." The alien woman's lips curved into something that might have been a smile. She wore what looked like adaptive armor that shifted colors with her movements, currently settling into deep blues and silvers. "You are neither dead nor significantly brain damaged, though your medical readings suggest you came close to both. I am Commander Surith of the Imperial Fleet. You are aboard the Eternal Whisper." Eli processed this information with the speed of someone whose system was still rebooting. "Right, Eternal Whisper, very poetic. Do all your ships have names that sound like romantic poetry collections, or did you get the special edition?" Surith's ears twitched forward, and Eli filed that away as probably meaning something important. "You employ humor as a stress response mechanism. Our xenopsychology databases suggested this about your species, but the translation algorithms rated it as low probability given your circumstances." "Your xenopsychology databases need an update," Eli said, trying to sit up and immediately regretting it. His ribs sent sharp complaints directly to his brain. "How long was I out? Where's my team? And please tell me you didn't abduct me for the galaxy's worst-timed alien autopsy, because I have strongly worded opinions about vivisection. Your injuries required intervention beyond your colony's medical capabilities," Surith explained, producing a device from her belt that looked like someone had crossbred a medical scanner with a piece of modern art. She passed it over him, and Eli felt a tingling warmth spread through his torso. The pain retreated to something almost manageable. Your team has been informed you survived the Ridgeback encounter and are receiving advanced medical treatment. They believe you were extracted by a passing corporate medical vessel. So you lied to them. We provided them with an explanation they could accept without triggering cultural contamination protocols. Surith's ears angled back slightly. Your species has strict psychological barriers regarding extraterrestrial contact. We respected those barriers. Eli laughed, which hurt but felt necessary. You're worried about contaminating us. Have you seen our entertainment media? We've been imagining aliens for centuries. Half our population would throw a parade if you parked on the White House lawn. The other half would attempt to weaponize us or worship us as deities, Surith countered. Neither response facilitates productive diplomatic relations. She had a point, though Eli wasn't about to admit it. He looked around what he assumed was a medical bay, taking in technology that made the colony's equipment look like stone tools. Everything had an organic quality to it, curves and flowing lines instead of right angles and rivets. The walls themselves seemed alive, responding to Surith's presence with subtle color shifts. So what happens now? Eli asked. You patch me up, wipe my memory, and dump me back at the colony with a story about how I heroically fought off the Ridgebacks and definitely didn't meet any aliens. No, the voice came from everywhere and nowhere, resonating through the walls themselves. The room's bioluminescent patterns shifted to deeper golds and ambers, and Surith immediately straightened to attention, her ears snapping forward in what was clearly a salute. A section of the wall that Eli had assumed was solid rippled and became transparent, revealing a chamber beyond. And in that chamber stood a woman who made Surith look utilitarian by comparison. She wore robes that seemed woven from starlight, shifting through colors that Eli's brain insisted didn't exist. Her ears were adorned with what looked like living jewelry, metal that moved and breathed against her skin. But it was her eyes that caught him, golden and ancient, holding the weight of experiences that made his 34 years feel like a cosmic blink. You may address me as Kalira, she said, and Eli realized with dawning horror that he was looking at someone very important, possibly the most important someone in whatever civilization he just stumbled into. Commander Surith has shown me the footage of your encounter with the indigenous predators. I found it illuminating. Eli's mouth engaged before his brain could stop it. Illuminating is one word for it. Stupid is another. Suicidal also comes to mind. I have a whole list if you'd like to hear it. Kalira's expression shifted, and Eli couldn't tell if she was amused or offended, possibly both. You stood against 5 apex predators armed with nothing but environmental resources and cognitive adaptability. Your species' combat doctrine suggests this is aberrant behavior. My species' combat doctrine involves guns, Eli said. Lots of guns. I just forgot to bring mine because I was collecting moss samples like a responsible scientist who doesn't expect to get jumped by alien murder wolves. Yet when confronted with lethal threat, you did not flee. You fought with creativity and determination despite overwhelming disadvantage. Kalira moved closer to the transparent wall, studying him with an intensity that made Eli want to check if he had something stuck in his teeth. The Ridgebacks retreated because you demonstrated something they recognized, worthy opposition. They retreated because I threw moss at them and got lucky. Luck is preparation meeting opportunity, Kalira said. You prepared by studying your adversaries. When opportunity presented itself in the form of immediate mortal danger, you applied that knowledge. This is the essence of adaptive combat intelligence. Eli looked between Kalira and Surith, trying to figure out what was happening. Okay, I appreciate the positive review of my near-death experience, but why do I get the feeling this isn't just a courtesy checkup? Kalira smiled, and it transformed her face into something both beautiful and terrifying. Because you are correct. I am bringing you to the Imperial capital, Dr. Vance. I wish to understand how your species has retained something my people have forgotten. The imperial capital appeared on the view screen like someone had taken a spiral galaxy and convinced it to hold still long enough to build cities on it. Eli pressed his face against the transparent wall of his quarters like a kid at an aquarium, watching orbital platforms larger than Earth's moon drift past in synchronized ballet. 3 days of faster-than-light travel had brought them here, and his brain still hadn't caught up with his circumstances. "You're staring again," Surith said from the doorway, her ears angled in what Eli had learned meant mild amusement. Over the past 72 hours, he'd become an accidental expert in Astren ear-based communication. It beat dwelling on the fact that he'd been essentially kidnapped by an alien Empress, even if the kidnapping came with excellent medical care and food that didn't taste like recycled disappointment. "In my defense, that's a city wrapped around an artificial sun," Eli said, pointing at a construction that defied several laws of physics he'd considered non-negotiable. "I'm allowed to stare. It's in the First Contact Handbook under Acceptable Responses to Mind-Breaking Cosmic Wonder. There is no First Contact Handbook. There should be. I'd write one, but I'm pretty sure Chapter 1 would just be Try Not to Die, repeated for 30 pages. The ship shuddered slightly as they entered a docking sequence. Somewhere below, in chambers Eli wasn't allowed to visit, Kalira was preparing for their arrival. He'd seen her only twice more since that first meeting, both times via holographic communication that made her look even more otherworldly. She'd asked him questions about human culture, military history, and why his species seemed to prefer violent solutions to complex problems. Eli had answered as honestly as he could, which mostly involved admitting that humans were really good at hitting things until problems went away. "The Empress will see you shortly," Surith said, her tone shifting to something more formal. "There are protocols you should understand. When addressing Her Eternal Majesty, you should avoid direct eye contact for extended periods, as it can be interpreted as challenge behavior among our people. So don't stare at the ancient alien Empress. Got it? Any other tips for not accidentally starting an interstellar incident? Avoid discussing reproduction, bodily functions, or making jokes about death. These topics are considered intimate among our culture and inappropriate for formal audiences." Eli mentally deleted about 60% of his usual conversation topics. "You're really narrowing my material here." The docking procedure completed with a gentle thump that Eli barely felt. Surith gestured for him to follow, leading him through corridors that seemed to anticipate their movement, walls shifting to create pathways that hadn't existed moments before. They passed other Astren, all of whom stopped to stare at Eli with varying degrees of curiosity and concern. He waved at a few, some waved back, others looked horrified. "Am I famous here?" Eli asked as they entered what appeared to be a transport platform. "The Empress does not often take personal interest in other species," Surith admitted. "The last time was approximately 200 standard years ago with the Kethvar delegation. Before that, another century. You are an anomaly, Dr. Vance. My people find anomalies either fascinating or threatening." "And which camp are you in?" Surith's ears tilted in a way that Eli had learned, meant she was thinking carefully about her answer. "I believe you represent something we need to remember. Whether that makes you fascinating or threatening remains to be seen." The platform delivered them to a chamber that made everything else Eli had seen look like a storage closet. The ceiling rose so high it had its own weather system, with what looked like artificial clouds drifting in lazy patterns. The floor was transparent, showing stars below as if they were standing in open space. And at the center of it all, seated on something that wasn't quite a throne but definitely communicated authority, was Kalira. She looked different here, more regal, less accessible. Her robes had shifted to deep purples and golds, and her ears were adorned with so much living jewelry that they seemed to glow with their own light. Around her stood what Eli assumed was her war council, all watching him with the intensity of people evaluating a particularly interesting specimen. "Dr. Eli Vance," Kalira said, her voice carrying across the chamber without seeming loud. "Welcome to the heart of the Estren Dominion. You stand where few outsiders have stood." Eli resisted the urge to make a joke about feeling special. "Thank you for the invitation, Your Majesty. Though I should mention that my grant supervisor is probably having a breakdown trying to figure out where I've gone." "Your grant supervisor has been informed you are participating in an extended research fellowship," Kalira said, and Eli wondered how deep the Estren influence on human affairs actually went. "We have also arranged for your doctoral thesis to be completed and submitted on your behalf. Consider it compensation for the inconvenience." "You finished my thesis." "Our xenobiology team found your research on the Ridgebacks fascinating. They extrapolated from your existing data and constructed conclusions that your academic institutions should find satisfactory. You will receive full credit, naturally." Eli didn't know whether to be grateful or insulted that aliens had done his homework for him. He settled on both. Kalira stood, descending from her throne with fluid grace. She approached Eli until they were only a few feet apart, her golden eyes studying him with that same unsettling intensity from before. "I brought you here because you demonstrated something my people have lost. We have technology that can reshape planets, weapons that can crack moons, ships that cross galaxies in heartbeats, but we have forgotten what it means to face the universe with nothing but courage and improvisation." "I wasn't being courageous," Eli said quietly. "I was terrified. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting despite fear." Kalira's expression softened slightly. "My warriors train for centuries. They master weapons that can alter reality. But when I asked them what they would do if stripped of all advantages, faced with death and nothing but their wits, most could not answer." "You did not need to answer. You simply acted." Eli thought about those moments in the canyon, the desperate scrambling, the absolute certainty that he was going to die. "I didn't have a choice. There is always a choice. You chose to stand, you chose to fight, you chose to survive." Kalira turned to her council, addressing them as much as Eli. "This is what we have forgotten. The galaxy sees the Estren Dominion as invincible, unassailable, but invincibility breeds complacency. We no longer remember how to struggle, how to adapt, how to be truly alive in the face of death." One of the council members, an older Estren with silver hair and ears heavy with ceremonial weights, spoke up. "Your Majesty, with respect, one human's survival does not represent a philosophical revelation." "Perhaps not," Kalira agreed. "But it represents a reminder. Humanity is young, reckless, unpredictable. They face the universe without our advantages and somehow endure. There is a lesson there for those willing to learn it." She turned back to Eli, and something in her expression shifted to something almost warm. "I am offering you a position as cultural liaison between our peoples. You would remain here, help us understand humanity, and in turn, help your species understand us when formal contact is established, which it will be sooner than your governments expect." Eli's mind raced through implications. Staying here meant leaving behind everything he knew, his research, his career, the terrible coffee, though honestly the coffee wouldn't be missed. "Can I think about it?" he asked. "Of course. You are not a prisoner, Dr. Vance. You are a guest and potentially a bridge between civilizations." Kalira smiled. "Though I should mention that our coffee is significantly better than what your colony provides." Eli laughed, surprised. "You've been monitoring our coffee." "We monitor everything. It is efficient." She gestured to Surith. "Commander Surith will show you to proper quarters. Take time to consider. When you decide, we will discuss terms." As Surith led him away, Eli looked back at the chamber, at Kalira returning to her throne, at the ancient alien civilization that had somehow decided he was worth their attention. His life had gone from cataloging moss to explaining humanity to aliens in the span of a week. "So," he said to Surith as they walked, "does the liaison position come with dental?" Her ears angled forward in what he now recognized as laughter. We will make sure your teeth are adequately maintained, yes. Eli thought about canyon fights and coffee and choices made in moments of terror. He thought about his mother's warnings and his ex-wife's disappointment and every decision that had led him to the ass end of space, where alien empresses noticed him fighting for his life. I'm going to say yes, he told Surith. Not today because apparently I'm supposed to think about it, but I'm going to say yes. I suspected you would. You do not seem like someone who runs from interesting problems. No, Eli agreed, watching stars drift past through impossible walls. I really don't. Somewhere in the distance, the capital's artificial sun completed its rotation, bathing the chamber in light that had traveled across dimensions to reach them. And Eli Vance, xenobiologist and accidental bridge between worlds, stood at the center of something vast and strange and terrifying and wonderful, exactly where he apparently belonged.